After an argument with my mother-in-law, my husband told me to go back to my parents' house to calm down. I did. A month later, he came to pick me up, only to discover that my entire family had moved away long ago. My name is Tara. I am 28 years old, a wife of 5 years, and a mother for 3.5. There are evenings when I still ask myself, where exactly did I go wrong that the family dinner table turned into a battlefield? The sharp, dry clack of silverware hitting the oak dining table echoed, so loud it made me flinch. My mother-in-law, Susan, sat at the head of the table, her eyes as sharp as knives. "Tara, taste this. It's so salty. Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" My hand, holding the bowl of soup, froze in mid-air. My fingertips went cold. This was the 7th time this month she had criticized my cooking. Sometimes she said it was too bland, sometimes too salty, sometimes too greasy, and sometimes she claimed it had no taste at all. I was used to being picked apart, but every time, my heart still tightened. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I tasted it, Susan, and it seemed fine to me. Maybe your taste buds have been preferring lighter foods lately. I'll pay more attention tomorrow. Pay attention to what? From the day you stepped foot in this house, I haven't had a single day of peace. You don't make any money, your cooking is terrible, and you're always dumping the kid at your parents' house. I don't understand what my son ever saw in you. Every word felt like a splash of ice water to my face. I looked over at my husband, Nathan. He kept his head down, eating his dinner, his eyebrows slightly furrowed, but he didn't say a word. "Nathan," I called out softly. He looked up at me, then at his mother, and sighed. "Tara, Mom is getting older. Just let it go and accommodate her a little. We'll talk after dinner." There it is again, that exact phrase. Accommodate. Let it go. Don't take it personally. In 5 years of marriage, every time there was a conflict, he stood in the middle, but he never actually stood by my side. I felt like an outsider in my own home. I put the bowl down, didn't say another word, and walked straight into the bedroom. That night, he walked in, his voice exhausted. "Your attitude was out of line today. If Mom uses harsh words, it's only because she wants what's best for us. You always have to blow things out of proportion." I looked at him. "In your eyes, whenever your mother and I have an issue, it's always my fault, isn't it? What else is it? She's my mother. 2 generations living under one roof will inevitably clash. What's the harm in you just holding your tongue? And what about me? Have you ever thought about me?" He grew irritated. "You've been staying at home for too long, so you're just creating drama out of nothing. Go back to your parents' house for a few days. Calm down and reflect on how a wife and daughter-in-law should behave. When you realize you're wrong, I'll come pick you up." Those words were the knife that severed the last thread of hope inside me. I nodded. "Fine, I'll go." The next morning, under the cold stare of my mother-in-law and the silence of my husband, I rolled my suitcase out of the house I had once thought of as my sanctuary. He was absolutely certain I would do what I had done in the past. Go home, cry for a few days, wait for his call, and obediently return. But this time was different. When I arrived at my parents' house in the Chicago suburbs, my mother, Linda, was sewing a quilt, and my father, Bill, was tending to his orchids on the patio. "Tara, why are you back at this hour, and with a suitcase?" I forced a smile. "Nathan and I had a little disagreement. He told me to come stay here for a few days to calm down." My mother looked at me closely, her eyes filled with worry. "Is it your mother-in-law again?" I stayed silent, and that silence was enough for my parents to understand. That night, I told them everything. I didn't exaggerate or add drama. I just talked about the suffocating dinners, the constant belittling, and how every time I wanted to go back to work, I was shut down because the family doesn't need the money, the kid is too young, and staying home is your biggest contribution. My mother shed tears. I didn't raise my daughter for her to be trampled on like this. My father sat in deep thought for a long time before asking, "Did you come back this time just to calm down, or do you have other plans?" That question made me pause. Right, what did I come back for? To wait for his call, or to wait until my resolve weakened? That night, I checked my phone. Not a single missed call, not a single text checking in, There was only a message from my mother-in-law in the family group chat. Someone's ego was too big, left after a few words. At least the house is peaceful now. Nathan didn't reply. I muted the group chat and set my phone aside. For the first time, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt incredibly light. In the days that followed, my parents didn't mention my in-laws. They cooked my favorite meals and took my son out to play so I could catch up on sleep. On the fourth day, while cleaning out my old bookshelf, I found my college design portfolio. I had majored in graphic design. Before getting married, I worked for a boutique ad agency. The pay wasn't high, but I was happy. After having my son, Leo, I quit. 5 years had passed. I opened my old MacBook. The software had updated, and the interfaces looked alien. I fumbled around like someone who had lost her roots. Fear washed over me. Can I even do this anymore? My mother set a plate of fruit on the desk. If you don't know it, relearn it. You're only 28. My father spoke from the doorway. Back in the day, I went back to trade school to become an electrician when I was over 40. It's never too late to do what you want to do. Those words opened a door. I reached out to Harper, an old college senior who now ran her own design studio in Los Angeles. I texted her, my hands shaking. She replied immediately, and we FaceTimed for almost an hour. She told me about the current market, freelancing, and online boot camps. She said, as long as you're willing to learn, supporting yourself isn't hard. The hardest part is having the courage to start over. I couldn't sleep that night, not out of self-pity, but out of hope. Just as I was starting to see a path forward, Nathan called. His voice was dry. Mom's blood pressure is high. The house is a mess. It's time for you to come home. I replied calmly. First, if your mom's blood pressure is high, she should see a doctor. Second, the house is a mess because the person who cleans it isn't there. Third, I am not wrong, and I will not apologize just to keep up appearances. The other end was silent for a few seconds before he snapped. If you want to be stubborn, then stay there. Don't come crying to me when you want to come back. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking, but my heart was no longer afraid. That night, I told my parents, I want to study design again. I want to earn my own money. My father slammed his hand on the table. If you need tuition, I've got it. My mother nodded. Leave Leo to me. You just focus on studying. I signed up for an intensive online boot camp and bought a new computer using my savings and a loan from my dad. Every day, I studied for 8 hours, doing exercises, relearning everything from the absolute basics. A week later, I landed my first freelance gig, designing product labels for a boutique bakery in Milwaukee. They paid me $150. When the money hit my account, I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't a lot, but it was money I had earned myself. I burst into tears, not because of the money, but because I realized my value hadn't disappeared. Half a month later, my father announced, "We are moving." I was shocked. Why, Dad? Not because we're afraid of gossip, but because this environment isn't good for you to start over. I want you and my grandson to have a peaceful place to live. We rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, close to a great preschool, and signed a 2-year lease. We didn't inform my in-laws. I figured if Nathan truly cared, he would find us. Exactly 1 month after the day I left, the doorbell rang. My father opened the door. Standing outside was Nathan, holding a bag of toys for our son. When he saw the unfamiliar apartment, saw me standing in the kitchen, and saw my parents sitting in the living room as if this was our permanent home, he was paralyzed. Tara, what is going on? He had gone to my parents' old house, only to find a for rent sign in the yard. In that moment, perhaps for the first time, he understood that I wasn't just throwing a tantrum. I had truly left. But my story was only just beginning. I had merely stepped through the first door of my new life. There were many storms ahead, but this time, I wasn't going into them empty-handed. I thought that after Nathan tracked us down to the new apartment, things would become clearer. But I was wrong. Some truths, when revealed, aren't meant to heal. They are meant to force you to look directly at the things you once deliberately ignored. 3 days after he left our apartment, I received a phone call. Hi, is this Tara? My name is Lily. I used to date Nathan. I was silent for a few seconds. The name wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard my mother-in-law mention it before, her voice full of regret. If Nathan had just married Lily, things would be so much better. That girl knew her place and came from a good family. I'd like to meet you for a bit. There are a few things I think you should know, she said. I agreed. Not out of jealousy, nor out of curiosity, but because I wanted to understand. I wanted to know if what I had endured for the past 5 years truly originated with me. We met at a small coffee shop near my new downtown office. Lily arrived early. She wore a crisp white button-down, her hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes were calm but not cold. I didn't come here to ruin your family, Lily started. I just think you have the right to know. I looked her in the eye. Go ahead. Lily spoke in an even tone, though she couldn't hide her exhaustion. Back when she was dating Nathan, she had visited his house. Susan was immediately displeased because Lily came from a blue-collar background. Her parents were factory workers. Susan told her straight to her face, "My son is going to be an executive. He needs a wife who can elevate him. With your family's background, how can you help him?" Nathan had no reaction. He just sat there in silence. I thought it was just a test, Lily said. But gradually, I realized he would never dare stand up to defend the woman beside him. I got tired, so I broke up with him. Listening to her, my heart didn't ache like I thought it would. Instead, a realization became glaringly clear. I wasn't the first person to stand in this position. After he married you, he texted me, Lily continued. Not flirting, just complaining. Complaining that his mother was difficult, that you argued too much, that being stuck in the middle was making him miserable. I let out a soft laugh. He always thought he was the one suffering the most. Lily looked at me apologetically. Please don't misunderstand. I have no feelings for him whatsoever. I just want you to know that the problem isn't you. Nathan has never learned how to actually be a husband. I thanked Lily. Leaving the coffee shop, I didn't feel shattered. On the contrary, I saw things clearer than ever before. If I went back without altering the structure of that family, I would forever be the one forced to yield. That evening, Nathan texted me, "I'm coming over tomorrow to take Leo out." I replied, "Let me know before you come, so my parents can arrange their schedule." The next day, he arrived looking more exhausted than before. He picked up our son, his eyes softening. "You're working now?" he asked. "Yeah. Designing at an agency nearby." He nodded. "I didn't think you'd be able to do it so fast." I looked at him. It's not that I couldn't do it. It's just that before, I chose to stay home for the family. He fell silent. As he took Leo out, my mother stepped onto the balcony and asked softly, "What are you planning to do?" I leaned against the railing, looking down at the busy Chicago street. "I haven't thought about divorce yet, but I'm not going back to the way things were." My mother sighed. Being a wife isn't just about enduring, but keeping a family together isn't easy either. The most important thing is whether you are respected. That night, Nathan brought our son back. He stayed for a bit. "Tara, I've been thinking. I know I haven't stepped up to protect you recently." I didn't respond. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words were what I had waited years to hear, but hearing them now didn't move me the way I had imagined. "Sorry for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "For letting you suffer. Is that it?" He looked at me awkwardly. "I think moving forward, I'll talk to Mom so she won't be so harsh." I shook my head. "I don't need your mother to be less harsh. I need you to have a backbone. I cannot live in a house where every single decision has to go through your mother." He frowned. "It's my house, but it's our family," I replied. Our conversation lasted for over an hour. For the first time, I didn't cry and I didn't raise my voice. I clearly stated everything I wanted. I would continue working. Leo would go to a preschool near my parents' house. If I were to move back in, our finances and household chores had to be clearly divided. And most importantly, he had to speak to his mother himself, not me. He listened, but I knew he was struggling internally. A week later, my mother-in-law unexpectedly called me. "Tara, are you busy?" Her tone was different. The harsh edge was gone. "I'm at the office. Come home for dinner this Sunday. I want to talk." I knew it wasn't just a simple dinner invitation. That night, I told my parents. My father looked thoughtful. Do you want to go? I thought about it for a long time. I want to face it. On Sunday, wearing a simple dress, I drove myself back to the old house. Everything looked the same, but the feeling inside me had changed. Susan was already sitting in the living room. Nathan stood beside her. Have a seat, Tara. I sat down, keeping my back straight. She looked at me for a moment before saying, I heard from Nathan that you're working again. Yes, that's good. When a woman has her own job, she doesn't overthink things. The comment still had a slight sting, but I didn't react. I don't want this family to break apart, she continued. But if you come back, you have to understand that this is my house. As a daughter-in-law, you need to know your place. I looked her dead in the eye. I know my place, but I also need to be respected. The atmosphere in the room plummeted. Nathan spoke up. Mom, I think if Tara comes back, I'm going to hire a part-time housekeeper. Tara is working. She can't handle all the chores alone. Susan was stunned. Hire a stranger? That's a waste of money. I'll pay for it, Nathan said. I looked at him. This was the first time I had ever seen him stand with a straight spine in front of his mother. The conversation that day wasn't entirely peaceful, but it wasn't explosive either. Susan didn't agree completely, but she didn't aggressively oppose it like before. Perhaps she realized I was no longer the daughter-in-law who only knew how to stay silent. When I left, Nathan walked me out to my car. Tara, give me some more time. I looked at the house behind him, the place where I had cried so many tears. I won't wait forever, but I am giving you a chance. Driving back, my heart felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time, I wasn't afraid to confront the issues. My marriage was at a crossroads. One path was returning, but with changes. The other was diverging entirely. I was no longer the person being pushed around. I was the one making the decisions. After that conversation, things didn't change overnight, but a very slight shift had begun. Nathan was no longer as passive as before, and I was no longer the woman who simply waited. The first week after our meeting, he proactively came to pick up Leo twice. It wasn't a rushed pick up and go. He stayed and ate dinner with my parents. During the first dinner with him, the atmosphere was a bit stiff. My father calmly ate his food, and my mother asked a few polite questions. Nathan answered softly, lacking the dismissive tone he used when I lived with his family. After clearing the table, he stood up to help my mother wash the dishes. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching. Oh, Nathan, go sit down, my mother insisted. It's okay, Mom. I rarely did this at home, so I need to practice, he replied. That simple sentence made me pause. Not because it was a grand gesture, but because of its simplicity. Before this, he had never considered household chores to be his responsibility. When he left that night, I walked him to the lobby. He looked at me, his eyes tired but unwavering. Tara, I talked to Mom again. And? She wasn't happy, but I made it clear that if you come back, we are hiring a part-time housekeeper, and you will continue working. And regarding her interference? I asked. He exhaled. I told her that marital issues need to be solved by the husband and wife alone. I remained silent. These were the words I had craved for 5 years, but I also knew that saying it once didn't guarantee it would last. I'm not forcing you to come back right away, he continued, but I want us to try again. I looked at him for a long time. I won't go back just for Leo's sake. I will only go back if I feel respected. He nodded. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work. At the new agency, I was just a junior graphic designer. The younger kids in the office were fast and caught on to trends quickly. I had to relearn every minor detail. Some days, I didn't get home until 9 p.m., my eyes burning, my head pounding like a tight string. But every time I opened my banking app and saw my paycheck deposited on time, I felt a little more grounded. One afternoon, the creative director called me into his office. Tara, the branding work you did for the client last week was solid. Do you want to try leading a small project? I was taken aback. Can I? He smiled. You had experience before you took your gap years. Don't underestimate yourself. I walked out of the conference room with my heart racing. For the first time in years, I was being recognized for my capabilities, not just as someone's wife. That night, I told my parents. My father laughed heartily. See? That's my girl. My mother looked at me, her eyes warm. A woman has to have her own thing. That's the only way she can stand tall. Nathan also called. I gave him a brief update. He was silent for a few seconds before saying, "I'm proud of you." That sentence softened my heart, but I didn't let myself get swept away by emotion. I simply replied, "Thank you." That weekend, my mother-in-law unexpectedly showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was teaching Leo how to color when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I saw her standing there holding a bag of fruit. I was a bit surprised but still said, "Come in, Susan." She walked in, her eyes scanning the neat, compact apartment. She didn't say anything, just set the bag on the table. "You're working now?" "Yes." "Is the commute far?" "Not too far." She sat down on the sofa. Leo ran over and hugged her legs. She patted his head, her expression softening. "I know you've endured a lot of frustration these past few months," she said slowly. "I also have a quick temper. But I don't want this family to fall apart." I sat opposite her, my back straight. "I don't want that either." She looked at me, her eyes lacking their usual sharp edge for the first time. "But you have to understand, I've lived my whole life doing things my way. Changing isn't easy." I replied softly, "I'm not forcing you to completely change. I just hope you respect how Nathan and I run our lives." The room fell silent. She sighed. "Nathan said you'd only come back if there were clear conditions. Let's hear them." I hadn't expected her to be so direct. I chose my words carefully. "If I come back, I will keep working. Household chores will be shared. Decisions regarding our child and our careers will be made by Nathan and me. If you offer advice, we will listen, but the final decision is ours." She was silent for a very long time. "Fine," she finally said. Her tone wasn't joyful, but it wasn't harsh either. "I'll try." I knew the word try didn't guarantee anything, but at least it was an open door. When she left, I walked her down to the lobby. She turned to look at me. "Tara, don't think I hate you. I was just afraid of losing my authority in my own house." That admission surprised me. I softened my voice. "I don't want to take your authority. I just want my own place to stand." She didn't say anything else, just nodded. That night, I sat alone on the balcony. The night breeze was cool, the sound of traffic distant. I remembered my early days as a daughter-in-law. I was always trying to please her, from how I cooked to how I spoke, to my daily routines. I thought if I were just good enough, everything would be fine. But I had forgotten one thing. If you don't defend your own boundaries, no one will do it for you. My phone vibrated. A text from Nathan. "Mom came to see you, didn't she?" "Yeah. She said she'd try to change." "I will too." I stared at those words for a long time. "I don't need you to be perfect," I replied. "I need you to be consistent." He called me immediately. "Tara, I understand. This time, I don't want to lose you." Hearing his voice on the other end of the line, it no longer sounded as rigid as before. I knew he was afraid. But that fear had to be accompanied by action. "Are you afraid of losing your family? Or afraid of losing your image?" I asked. He was silent for a few seconds. "I'm afraid of losing you." I closed my eyes. "Then prove it." We agreed to try a trial separation. He would rent an apartment near my office, and his mother could visit on weekends. If things went well, we would figure out the next steps. It wasn't an easy decision, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking forward, not being dragged along. My marriage was no longer a solo battle I had to carry alone. At the very least, there was dialogue now. I knew there were more challenges ahead. Old habits don't vanish after a few promises. But I had changed. And when a woman changes, the family dynamic is forced to shift as well. I was no longer afraid of losing, because I had found myself. 2 weeks after that conversation, Nathan actually rented a small apartment, a 10-minute walk from my office. It wasn't spacious or luxurious, but it was clean, had good natural light, and most importantly, it was completely outside his mother's sphere of control. The day he took me to see the place, I stood in the middle of the empty living room, looking out the west-facing window. The afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the hardwood floor, the kind of warm light I had been missing for years. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's livable," I replied. He looked at me, seemingly waiting for more, but I didn't offer anything. I didn't want to make premature promises. We agreed on a 3-month trial. Leo would stay with me. Nathan moved into the apartment first, got it set up, and then came to pick us up over the weekend. That first weekend, I stepped into the new apartment feeling a mix of unfamiliarity and caution. He had organized things fairly well. The fridge was stocked with groceries, the living room had a soft rug, and there was a small bookshelf. "Did you pick all this out yourself?" I asked. "Yeah. I asked the store clerk what was safe for kids," he said. I nodded, no praise, no criticism, but internally, something shifted slightly. Our first dinner there, we ate together. No mother-in-law chiming in, no scrutinizing glares, just the three of us. Leo was laughing and chattering, while Nathan and I were still a bit awkward. Once Leo was asleep, Nathan sat next to me. "Tara, I know you don't trust me completely yet, but I'm going to try." I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't need you to say much. I need you to keep your word." He nodded. The first week went relatively smoothly. He came home from work on time, helped me bathe Leo, and occasionally cooked a simple breakfast. One evening, when I was working late on an urgent project, he picked Leo up early and called me. "Just finish your work and come home when you're done. Everything here is fine." That sentence made me freeze in the hallway of my office. Before, whenever I suggested working overtime, he would say, "Who's going to take care of the house?" Now, he was taking care of it. But the real change wasn't just coming from him. It was coming from me, too. I started letting go of my need to control everything. Previously, terrified of being criticized, I tried to do everything perfectly. Now, I allowed myself to be tired. I allowed him to do things his way, even if he wasn't very skilled at it. One night, I noticed soap residue on the dishes he washed. I saw it, but I didn't say anything. I told myself the most important thing was that he was doing it. However, the true test didn't come from within our marriage. It came from the outside. One afternoon, Susan called me. "Tara, come home for dinner this weekend. We're staying at the new apartment now, Susan. Then come to the old house. Are you planning on living separately forever?" I kept my voice calm. "It's a 3-month trial. After that, we'll decide what's next." She was silent for a few seconds. "I'm old. Don't you consider my feelings at all?" That hit a soft spot in me, but I didn't let myself waver. "It's because we do consider your feelings that we haven't cut ties. We'll still come visit on weekends." She didn't say anything else, just grunted an okay and hung up. That night, Nathan sat deep in thought. "Mom called you, didn't she?" "Yeah," he sighed. "I know it's hard for her to accept, but if we go back to living together the way things were, history will just repeat itself." I looked at him. This was the first time he had vocalized this before I had to bring it up. "Are you afraid of upsetting her?" I asked. "I am," he admitted, "but I'm more afraid of losing my own family." Those words left me speechless. On Sunday, we took Leo to visit his grandmother. The meal wasn't hostile, but there was still a noticeable distance. She spoke to me less than before, mostly focusing on her grandson. When I went to the kitchen to help clean up, she stood beside me. "Is it comfortable living separately?" she asked, her tone lacking its usual coldness. "It's fine," I replied honestly. "Does Nathan do chores?" "He does." She frowned slightly and muttered, "Don't let him get spoiled. Men who get too comfortable become lazy." I smiled faintly. "I don't spoil him. I just share the load." She didn't argue. I realized she was learning how to step back, even if it was difficult for her. Returning to the new apartment, I felt the suffocation lifting. But this was also the moment I began to look deeper into myself. One night after Leo fell asleep, I sat down and wrote out my personal goals. Not goals as a wife or a mother, but as Tara. I wanted to become a lead designer within 3 years. I wanted a personal savings account large enough that I wouldn't have to rely on anyone. I wanted my son to grow up seeing a strong mother, not a submissive one. Nathan walked out and saw me writing. "What are you writing?" "My life plan." He sat down next to me. "Am I in it?" I looked at him. "Yes, but you aren't the center of it." He smiled faintly, a bit bitterly. I used to think I was your only pillar. You are a pillar, I said, but you're not the only one. We sat in silence for a moment. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a necessary pause. The first month of living separately concluded without any major blow-ups. But I knew the real test would come when old habits tried to creep back in. One evening, he came home later than usual without giving me a heads up. I called, but he didn't answer. It was nearly 11 p.m. when he walked in, smelling faintly of alcohol. I had to entertain some clients, he said. I looked at him, and old memories came rushing back. The times he used work as an excuse to leave me alone to face his mother. You could have texted me, I said. Are you so busy you don't have 10 seconds? He stayed silent. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, if you want to change, you have to start with the small things. He sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. I'm sorry. I'm just not used to this yet. I knew change wouldn't be perfect immediately. But if every time he made a mistake, he owned up to it and corrected it, maybe we still had a chance. I didn't fall asleep right away that night. I stared at the ceiling, reflecting on the journey I had been on from the woman who left her in-laws' house with a small suitcase to the woman standing between two choices. Now, I was living in a transitional space, not fully returning, but not completely walking away either. I didn't know what the next 3 months would bring, but I knew I was different. I was no longer afraid of losing my place, because I had carved out a place for myself. The second month of living separately kicked off with an unforeseen crisis. One morning, just as I arrived at the office, I got a call from my mother-in-law, Tara. I fell. I froze. Where did you fall? In the bathroom. Slipped. Nathan is taking me to the hospital. I didn't overthink it. I asked my boss for a half day of PTO and took an Uber straight to the hospital. During the ride, my mind was racing. No matter how much conflict existed between us, she was still my husband's mother and my son's grandmother. When I arrived, Nathan was sitting in the ER waiting room, looking incredibly stressed. What did the doctor say? I asked. A minor fracture in her wrist. Needs a cast, but nothing life-threatening. I exhaled in relief. A short while later, a nurse wheeled her out. Her right arm was wrapped in a white cast, her face pale, but she maintained her tough exterior. When she saw me, a flash of surprise crossed her eyes. You came too? Yes. I didn't say much. I just followed them and handled the paperwork for a short observation stay, per the doctor's orders. Nathan was busy dealing with forms and taking non-stop calls from his office. By the afternoon, he had to rush back to handle an emergency at work, leaving me in the hospital room with Susan. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic. She lay on the bed, staring out the window. I'm sorry for being a burden to you, she said quietly. It's nothing, Susan. She was quiet for a moment before asking, living separately, does it make you feel lighter? The question didn't carry its usual interrogative tone. It sounded like genuine curiosity. Yes, I answered honestly. She gave a small nod. Nathan grew up used to living by my rules. I was used to deciding things for him. I didn't think it bothered you that much. I looked at her. In that moment, I didn't see my mother-in-law. I saw an aging woman learning how to let go. I don't blame you, I said. I was just afraid of losing my own voice, she sighed. And I was afraid of losing my role. Those two sentences fit together like puzzle pieces. We were no longer standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. We were finally seeing each other's fears. During her 3 days in the hospital, Nathan and I took turns caring for her. He took a day off, and I squeezed in visits during my lunch breaks and after my shifts. My mother, Linda, even cooked soup and brought it to the hospital. When Susan saw my mother arrive, she looked a bit embarrassed. You shouldn't have gone through the trouble, Linda. My mother smiled warmly. It's nothing, Susan. We're family. Two women who used to be on opposing sides were now sitting next to each other, chatting softly. Standing at the foot of the bed, my heart felt inexplicably light. After she was discharged, the doctor ordered her to limit the use of her right arm for at least a month. Nathan announced he was going to hire a part-time caregiver for her house. I'm not used to strangers in my home, she protested. You'll have to get used to it, he replied. His tone was definitive, but not harsh. You can't do everything yourself right now. I realized he was keeping his promises. In the days that followed, I occasionally stopped by to help her with light cleaning, not out of forced obligation, but because I wanted to. One afternoon, as I was wiping down the table, she looked at me and said, "Tara, if you feel living separately is better, then stay there. I won't force you back." I stopped what I was doing. "Do you really mean that?" "Yes. I don't want your marriage to fracture because of me." I didn't answer right away. I just said softly, "Thank you." That night, I told Nathan. He sat in silence for a while. I didn't think Mom would ever say that. When people feel vulnerable, they tend to see things more clearly, I said. He took my hand. "Tara, I know I still have a lot of flaws, but I want to keep this family." I looked down at his hand. It was the same hand that used to disappoint me, but now it was trying. "A family isn't just about keeping each other around," I said slowly. "It's about growing up together." The trial month was almost over. Things weren't perfect, but the suffocating dinners were gone. Our son was happy, and my career was progressing well. The project I was leading received high praise from the client, and my boss recommended a bonus. One night, while the three of us were eating dinner, Leo suddenly asked, "Mommy, are we gonna live here forever?" I looked at him, then at Nathan. Nathan answered for me, "If Mommy likes it, we'll stay here." Leo nodded and went back to eating. That simple exchange made me realize something. Adult decisions directly impact children, and what a child needs isn't a huge house, but a safe environment. At the end of the second month, we sat down for a serious talk. "Tara, what do you think about living separately long-term?" he asked. "I think it's a good choice. And Mom? We'll still take care of her, but we don't necessarily have to live together." He looked thoughtful. "I'll have a clear conversation with her." I knew that wouldn't be easy, but I also knew he had matured far beyond the man who once told me to go back to my parents' house to think about my mistakes. That night, lying next to him, the distance between us was gone, but I didn't allow myself to sink entirely into this temporary comfort. I understood one thing. A successful marriage isn't about returning to the way things were. It's about rebuilding on a new foundation. And I, the woman who had once left with a single suitcase, was now choosing exactly where I wanted to belong. The third month of our trial period began with a rare, peaceful evening. I was sitting on the sofa, doing a final review of a design before sending it to a client, while Nathan was folding Leo's clothes. If I had seen this image a year ago, I would have thought I was dreaming. But it is precisely in these peaceful moments that I learned to look deeper into reality. I no longer harbored the illusion that simply changing our address would magically erase all our conflicts. Living separately reduced direct friction with my mother-in-law, but it didn't automatically fix the ingrained habits between Nathan and me. One evening, I received an email assigning me a new, major project, a 3-month contract. I was so thrilled I wanted to share the news immediately. "Nathan, the agency put me in charge of the main project. If I do well, I might get a promotion." He looked up and smiled. "That's amazing. You're going to be really busy then." "Yeah, I might have to work some evenings." He went quiet for a moment before asking, "What about Leo?" The question wasn't hostile, but I sensed the underlying anxiety. "We'll split the duties," I answered. "I can't turn down this opportunity." He nodded, but I knew he wasn't entirely comfortable. In the following days, my schedule became packed. I came home late 2 or 3 times a week. Some days, I didn't get back until almost 10 p.m. Nathan didn't complain. He always had dinner saved for me, but I could feel his exhaustion. One night, after Leo went to sleep, he said, "Tara, I don't object to you working, but I feel like I'm drowning." I set my bowl down. "Drowning? How?" "Before, when you were home, I only had to focus on making money. Now that everything has changed, I have to completely reorganize my life. I'm just not used to it." I looked at him for a long time. "Do you want me to go back to how things were?" He shook his head instantly. "No. I'm afraid I'm not doing a good job." That admission softened my heart. "We're both learning," I said gently. "I'm also learning how not to take on everything myself." We agreed to create a detailed chore chart. Who picks up Leo on which days, who cooks, who pays the bills. It sounded sterile, but that clarity helped us avoid misunderstandings. However, the real challenge wasn't dividing chores. It was the pressure from our extended families. One afternoon, my dad called. "Tara, your mother-in-law came by the house yesterday." I paused. "Why did she come over, Dad?" "She just checked in, chatted for a bit. Said you've been busy and haven't visited much." I sighed. "What do you think?" "I think she's worried. But don't let that make you revert to old habits." I knew my dad was right. Susan's concern was no longer venomous, but it still carried the fear of losing her son. That weekend, I proactively took Leo to visit her. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted my son to maintain his bond with his grandmother. She watched me walk in, her eyes much softer than before. "You've been busy lately?" "Yes, I have a new project at the agency." "Well, work hard, but don't exhaust yourself." That comment caught me off guard. In the past, she used to say that staying home made me idle and prone to drama. Now she was telling me not to overwork myself. Time and upheaval had evidently shifted her perspective. During dinner, she talked about the neighbors and her health, no passive-aggressive jabs. When I stood up to clear the table, she said, "Leave it. The housekeeper comes tomorrow." I smiled. "Are you getting used to her?" "If I don't get used to it, what choice do I have?" We looked at each other and shared a light laugh. That night, as Nathan and I were leaving, she stood at the door. "Living separately is fine, but don't become strangers." "We won't," I replied. "We're still a family." Returning to the apartment, I distinctly felt my own personal growth. I no longer viewed my mother-in-law as an adversary, but as an older woman learning to adapt. Just as I thought things were stabilizing, my agency suddenly announced layoffs due to corporate restructuring. My creative director called me into his office. "Tara, your project work is excellent, but management is looking at eliminating certain roles. You need to be mentally prepared." I walked out of the office feeling utterly deflated. I had just begun to reclaim my place, and now I was facing the risk of losing my job. That night, I told Nathan. He sat in silence, then said, "If something happens, I can still provide for us." Once, that sentence would have brought me comfort. Now, I didn't want to rely on it. "I don't want to go back to square one," I said. He looked at me. "I understand. If you need to take on freelance work, I'll support you." I nodded. In that moment, I realized the biggest difference between the Nathan of today and the Nathan of the past. He was no longer dismissing my fears. He was standing beside me in them. A few days later, the layoff list was announced. I wasn't on it. Instead, my project received stellar reviews, and my position was secured. I breathed a massive sigh of relief. That night, I rested my head on his shoulder. I was really scared. "Me too," he replied. I realized that marriage isn't about avoiding storms. It's about not letting go of each other's hands when the waves hit. The 3-month trial was coming to a close. We sat down together. "Tara, do you want to continue living separately long-term?" he asked. "Yes." "Do you?" "I do." We didn't need flowery promises, just a clear decision. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was no longer the woman who left in tears. I was a woman who knew exactly what she deserved. And this time, if I had to keep walking, I would walk with my head held high. The 3-month trial of living separately concluded not with a grand family meeting, but on a remarkably ordinary evening. I was hanging laundry on the balcony, Nathan was washing dishes in the kitchen, and Leo was sitting on the floor building with his Legos. Everything unfolded so naturally that I suddenly realized this kind of normalcy used to be an unimaginable luxury. Nathan stepped out onto the balcony and stood beside me. "Tara, I talked to Mom. We're going to live separately permanently." I turned to look at him. The streetlights illuminated his face. The hesitation from the early days was entirely gone. "What did she say?" I asked. At first, she wasn't happy, but then she said as long as we're getting along, that's what matters. I stayed silent for a few seconds. I knew that getting her to say that meant he had navigated an immense amount of pressure. "Thank you," I said. He shook his head slightly. "Not for you, for our family." But a new challenge arrived in a way I never expected. One afternoon, while I was at the office, I received a call from Lily. Tara, I'm sorry to call you during the day. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Nathan might be receiving an offer to relocate. I froze. Relocate? My company has partners opening a new branch in Austin, Texas. They're eyeing him for the regional manager position. I overheard it, and I thought you should know. I thanked Lily and hung up. My hands went cold. A relocation meant completely upending the life we had just stabilized. That night, when Nathan came home, I asked him directly, "Did you get an offer to move to Austin?" He looked at me, clearly shocked. "You know?" "Yes." He sat down and sighed. "They just discussed it preliminarily. The pay is higher, the position is better, but it means relocating for at least 3 years. What are you planning to do?" He looked at me, his eyes deeply conflicted. "I haven't decided. I'm thinking about it." I sat opposite him. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about my career. But I'm also thinking about you and Leo. We just got settled here." I could feel the internal tug of war within him. The man who had spent his life in his mother's shadow was now facing a real opportunity to prove himself. "Do you want to go?" I asked. He was silent for a very long time. "I want to try, but I'm afraid you'll have to sacrifice." I smiled faintly. "This time, if there are sacrifices, we decide together." We talked late into the night. If we moved, I could ask for a remote transfer or go fully freelance. Leo would have to change schools. Both sets of parents would stay behind in Chicago. I called my mother. "Mom, what if we move to Austin?" She was silent for a few seconds. "Wherever you go, as long as your marriage is solid, that's what matters. Your dad and I will be fine here." I called my mother-in-law. "Susan, Nathan's company wants to transfer him to Austin." On the other end of the line, she was silent for a long time. "That's so far." "Yes." She sighed. "Does Nathan want to go?" "He's considering it." "What do you think?" I looked out the window at the glowing city lights. "I think if it's a good opportunity, we should try." She spoke slowly. "I'm old. I can't follow you out there, but I won't hold you back. Just don't forget about me." Hearing that, my heart softened. The woman who once feared losing control now only feared the distance. After several nights of deliberation, we sat down together. "Tara, I'm taking the offer," he said. I looked at him. "I agree." He took my hand. "Are you sure?" I've learned not to be afraid of change. The decision was made not for the higher salary, but because we wanted to take the next step together, rather than staying stagnant out of fear. The following weeks were a whirlwind. He finalized his transfer paperwork. I negotiated a temporary remote work setup. My agency agreed to keep me on for a 3-month trial basis from Texas. We looked for schools, searched for a new apartment. On the day we broke the news to our families, my dad just said, "Go. If you don't try when you're young, you'll regret it later." My mom hugged Leo, her eyes red. My mother-in-law sat quietly, then said, "Nathan, remember to take good care of your wife and son." "I will, Mom." The night before we flew out, I stood alone in the small Chicago apartment that had been our home for the past few months. This was the place that witnessed my transformation from a woman pushed back to her parents' house to someone actively making decisions about her future. Nathan walked in. "Tara, do you regret it?" I shook my head. "No." "Because this time, no one forced me." He hugged me. "I didn't want you to follow me out of obligation either." "We are a team," I replied. The early morning flight took us away from Chicago. Leo fell asleep on my shoulder. Nathan sat beside me, gripping my hand. I looked out the airplane window as the city grew smaller beneath us. I didn't feel regret, only the anticipation of a new chapter opening. I used to think marriage was about enduring to keep a family together. Now I understand that marriage is about navigating the crossroads together, feeling afraid, but never letting go of each other's hands. We didn't know what Austin would bring, but this time, I was no longer the one leaving out of misery. I was the one choosing the journey. Austin welcomed us with a blazing, sunny morning and the dry heat of Texas. Stepping out of the airport, I took a deep breath. The warm southern air made me feel both like a stranger and deeply excited. This wasn't a short vacation. It was a true life transition. The apartment we rented was near Lady Bird Lake. It wasn't overly spacious, but it was incredibly bright. The balcony offered a distant view of the city skyline, which lit up beautifully at night. Leo ran around the living room, laughing loudly. "Mommy, the new house is so pretty." I smiled, though a sliver of anxiety still lingered inside me. Big changes always come with new challenges. In the early days, Nathan was consumed by his new branch. He came home later than usual, having to build a team from scratch and handle a slew of operational issues. I was juggling my remote work for my Chicago agency while getting Leo acclimated to his new preschool. On his first morning at the new school, Leo gripped my hand tightly. "Mommy, I'm scared." I knelt down and looked into his eyes. Mommy was scared too. But if we don't try, we won't know what we can do. He nodded and walked into the classroom, tentatively. I stood outside the door for a long time, my heart giving a slight, anxious squeeze. When I picked him up that afternoon, the teacher said, "He's a bit quiet, but very well behaved." I let out a massive breath of relief. At home, I set up my workspace. My laptop sat next to a window, offering a patch of bright blue Texas sky. The agency gave me 3 months to work remotely. After that, I had to decide whether to transfer fully or find a new path locally. One night, while I was tweaking a design, Nathan stepped out onto the balcony. "Tara, are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a bit tired." He leaned against the railing, looking down at the traffic. "I know you sacrificed a lot." I turned to look at him. "I didn't sacrifice. I made a choice." He stayed silent. I knew he still felt guilty. But the real challenges wouldn't just come from work. A week after we settled in, my mother-in-law FaceTimed us. "You look thinner, Tara. Probably from being so busy." "Just a little, Susan." She panned the camera around. "The new place looks nice, but being all the way out there, I miss my grandson." I could hear the emptiness in her voice. "Why don't you come stay with us for a bit, Susan?" She shook her head. "I'm used to my neighborhood here. I wouldn't feel comfortable leaving for too long." I knew it wasn't easy for her to leave the place she had lived in for decades, but the geographic distance made me realize something. Whether living together or far apart, the most important thing isn't the physical distance, but the connection. The first month flew by. Nathan's job gradually stabilized. He seemed more confident in his managerial role. One day, he came home and said, "I had to handle a massive conflict within the team today. A year ago, I probably would have avoided it. Today, I had to face it head on." I smiled. "You're growing." He smiled back. "Probably, thanks to you." I didn't reply. I knew everyone had to walk their own path. By the end of the second month, my Chicago agency informed me they couldn't sustain a remote contract long-term. I had 2 weeks to decide. That night, I sat paralyzed in front of my monitor, my heart heavy. I had rebuilt my career in Chicago, and now I faced the risk of starting over again. Nathan looked at me. "You can find an agency here. It won't be easy, but I believe in you." I hid. "I'm afraid of starting over again." He walked over and sat next to me. "You've started over before, and you succeeded." His words reminded me of the day I dragged my suitcase to my parents' house. Compared to then, I was no longer empty-handed. I sent my portfolio to several design agencies in Austin. A week later, I received an interview invitation. The interview was at a sleek, boutique office near downtown. The creative director was a woman in her 40s, with sharp but friendly eyes. "You took a 5-year gap to raise your child?" she asked. "Yes. And you came back?" I didn't want my son growing up, seeing a mother who only knew how to endure. She looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. "We need people with accountability. You can start on a 2-month probationary period." I walked out of the office, feeling as light as the Texas breeze. I called Nathan immediately. I got the job. On the other end of the line, he laughed loudly. I knew it. That night, we took a walk along the river trails. Leo ran ahead, barefoot on the grass. Nathan held my hand. "Tara, I never thought I'd leave Chicago. Me neither. But if we hadn't left, maybe we'd still be stuck." I looked out over the dark water. Sometimes taking a big step isn't about running away. It's about growing up. We stood there listening to the city hum. I didn't know how many more challenges lay ahead, but I knew I was no longer afraid. I used to think happiness meant being accepted. Now I understand. Happiness is living true to yourself, while still having someone by your side. The 2-month probationary period at the new agency passed faster than I expected. The environment here was completely different from Chicago. The pace of life was a bit more laid back, but the pressure to perform was just as intense. I had to prove I deserved to stay not because I had followed my husband here, but because of my own actual talent. In the early days, I kept my habit of arriving half an hour early. I booted up my Mac and double-checked every design detail before submitting it to clients. I knew I wasn't as young as the fresh graduates, but I had something they didn't: the resilience of someone who had lost herself and fought to get herself back. One afternoon, the creative director called me into her office. "Tara, the branding project you handled for that coastal resort last week was excellent." The client feedback was overwhelmingly positive. I nodded modestly. "Would you like to sign on full-time?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought of Chicago, of the small apartment where I had rebuilt myself, and of the nights I cried quietly, feeling invisible. And then I looked at her. I would. That night, when I showed Nathan the employment contract, he smiled broadly. "Congratulations, Tara." I sat down next to him. "I don't want to just be the person following behind you anymore." "I know," he replied, "and I'm proud that you aren't." We sat together in our Austin apartment. The warm evening breeze blew through the windows. Leo was in his room coloring. I suddenly realized we were no longer communicating through resentment and blame, but through shared plans. But life never sails smoothly forever. One evening, as I was prepping dinner, Nathan's phone rang. He answered, and his face instantly drained of color. "Mom is in the hospital." I froze. What happened? Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. "They're monitoring her." I looked at him. The geographical distance suddenly became a very real, terrifying obstacle. "Are you flying back immediately?" He nodded. "I'm booking the earliest flight." I looked at Leo playing on the rug. I knew this time I couldn't stand on the sidelines like before. "I'm going with you." He shook his head. "You have your new job. I can request a few days of emergency PTO. Family can't be abandoned." We packed in the middle of the night. The next morning, I emailed my boss, and we flew back to Chicago. In the hospital room, my mother-in-law lay incredibly still, her face paler than ever. When she saw us walk in, she struggled to sit up. "You came back?" "Yeah," Nathan said, his voice thick. I stepped closer. "How are you feeling, Susan?" "Just my blood pressure. Getting old." I looked at her frail, ivy-bruised hand, resting on the white blanket. The woman who had once caused me the most pain now elicited an overwhelming sense of empathy. During our days at the hospital, Nathan and I took turns caring for her. My parents also visited. My mother even brought her homemade soup. One evening, while Nathan stepped out to take a call, she looked at me. "Tara, if something happens to me, please don't hold a grudge against Nathan." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" "I know I was wrong about a lot of things, but I have peace of mind knowing you are by his side." I held her hand. "You're going to get better, Susan. You have to come visit us in Texas and see your grandson." She smiled weakly. "You're still as stubborn as ever." I shook my head. "I'm not stubborn anymore. I just didn't want to lose myself." She looked at me for a long time, then gave a faint nod. After nearly 2 weeks of treatment, her condition stabilized. The doctor discharged her, but strongly recommended she not live alone. Nathan discussed it with me. "Should we ask Mom to move to Austin with us?" I thought about it. "Will she agree?" He looked toward the hospital room. "I'll ask her." When he suggested it, she remained silent for a long time. "It's so far away, I don't want to intrude." "I don't want you living alone," he said. I chimed in. "Come stay with us for a while, Susan. If you don't like it, we'll figure something else out." She looked at us, her eyes devoid of the harshness from years past. "Are you sure I won't be a bother?" I smiled. "I'm not the same daughter-in-law I used to be." She finally agreed to try living in Austin for a few months. On the flight back, I looked at the woman sitting next to me. She leaned slightly against her seat, her hands clutching her purse. I knew this was a massive leap for her, too. I didn't know how living together this time would pan out, but I was no longer afraid of conflict. I understood now that family isn't about figuring out who wins. It's about learning when to yield at the right time. The day my mother-in-law followed us to Austin, I stood in the airport terminal watching her walk slowly behind Nathan. The small suitcase she dragged behind her sounded exactly like the one I had rolled out of her house years ago. The only difference was, this time, we were walking together. The apartment suddenly felt a bit tighter, but the atmosphere was strangely peaceful. I rearranged my home office to give her the guest bedroom. Initially, she was hesitant. "Tara, you can keep working in that room. I can sleep on the sofa." "It's fine, Susan. I'm used to working in the living room anyway." She looked at me with a fleeting look of guilt. In the early days, we maintained a polite distance. I went to work, Nathan was busy with his corporate branch, and Susan stayed home watching Leo and cooking simple meals. There were no more snide remarks about bland food or scrutinizing glares. Perhaps we both understood that at this age, health and peace were the only things that truly mattered. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, she called out to me. "Tara, did you eat breakfast?" "Yes, I ate already. I made some oatmeal." "Take a little bit with you in a thermos." I froze. Images of the tense dinners that used to choke me flashed through my mind. And now, the woman who used to insult my cooking was packing me a hot breakfast to go. "Thank you, Susan." The words came out effortlessly, completely devoid of resentment. Living under the same roof this time was fundamentally different. Probably because I had changed. I was no longer desperately trying to please her at all costs. I did my part, respected her, but didn't forfeit my own voice. One evening, while Nathan was still at the office, Susan and I sat watching TV together. Leo was asleep in his room. "Do you miss Chicago, Susan?" I asked. "I do. But having my grandson around makes me happy." I nodded. "You probably thought I'd never be able to sit and talk to you normally like this again." She looked at me. "I thought so too." She chuckled softly. "Women these days are different. Different because you refuse to repeat our mistakes." She paused for a moment before adding, "Back when I was a new daughter-in-law, I suffered much worse than you. I thought enduring it was the only way to keep a family together." Hearing that, my heart softened. I used to think that too, but I chose not to endure because I didn't want my son growing up thinking his mother was weak. She looked at me for a long time. The sharpness in her eyes was completely gone, replaced only by a profound understanding. In the days that followed, Nathan grew busier. Corporate wanted him to implement massive changes, and I was working overtime more frequently as well. Sometimes, I'd get home late to find Susan had already fed Leo and was waiting up for us. "Are you tired from work?" she would ask. "A little bit. Don't take on too much." If I had heard that sentence a few years ago, I would have assumed it was sarcasm. Now, I knew it was genuine concern. But living together wasn't entirely frictionless. One afternoon when I got home, Susan called me into her room. "Tara, I want to talk to you." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes?" "Nathan's company is restructuring again. The regional branch here might get absorbed. Do you think if things go south, he should try transferring back to Chicago corporate?" I looked at her. "He's already made a decision. If corporate tries to demote him, he's going to leave and start his own independent consulting firm." She gasped. "Are you sure? That's so risky." "I know. But if he doesn't take the leap, he'll always live with the regret of never trying." She went silent. "Do you really believe in him that much?" "We believe in each other." That answer left the room quiet for a few seconds. I knew she was still accustomed to protecting her son, while I was accustomed to standing beside my husband as an equal. That night, when Nathan came home, I told him about the conversation. He looked at me, his gaze deep. "You think Mom doesn't trust me?" "No, it's not that she doesn't trust you. She's afraid of losing her security." He stayed quiet. "She used to be afraid of losing her authority. Now she's afraid of seeing me fail." He bowed his head. "I used to let you two fight each other. Now, I don't need to pick a side. I just need to stand in the right place." He took my hand. "Thank you." The days of cohabitating passed like that, not overly loud, but full of minor things that required compromise. I realized that harmony doesn't come from proving who is right or wrong. It comes from both sides accepting change. One weekend afternoon, we all went to Lady Bird Lake. Susan walked slowly behind us, while Leo ran ahead. Nathan stood in the middle, supporting his mother with one hand and waving at our son with the other. Watching that scene, I felt a deep stillness in my soul. If I had chosen to stay and remain silent back then, I would still be living in a suffocating cage today. If I had chosen to walk away forever, I would never have witnessed this transformation. I left to find myself, and when I returned, I was no longer a wounded victim, but someone capable of opening her heart. That evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, my mother-in-law suddenly spoke up. "Tara, if I decide to go back to Chicago eventually, don't worry about me. I'm at peace now." I looked at her. At peace about what? At peace because I know you aren't weak. I smiled. I'm not weak, but I still need my family. She nodded. I knew this journey was approaching a new milestone. Not an ending, but a completion. That summer, Austin entered its most blistering, sun-drenched days. The warm Texas breeze blew across our balcony, but my heart felt as tranquil as water after a storm. My mother-in-law had been with us for nearly 4 months. What started as a temporary stay had settled into a comfortable routine. She still missed Chicago, her old neighborhood, but every morning when she saw Leo run out to hug her, I knew she didn't feel isolated anymore. Nathan had finally taken the plunge. He rejected the corporate demotion and officially launched his own independent consulting firm. His small rented office already had 2 employees. I occasionally helped him design pitch decks and branding materials, while he learned how to manage cash flow, contracts, and risks. There were nights we stayed up late, but it wasn't to argue, it was to strategize together. One afternoon, when I got home from work, Susan called me into her room. "Tara, I want to go back to Chicago." I paused. "For good?" "Yes. I've stayed here long enough. Seeing you and Nathan doing well, my mind is at ease." I sat next to her. "You don't want to stay with us anymore?" She smiled. "A family doesn't have to live under the exact same roof to be close. Me staying here sometimes creates unnecessary pressure." I understood she was telling the truth. Even though we were getting along much better, her presence still created an invisible layer of caution. "If you go back, we'll still visit often. That's a promise." That night, we all ate dinner together. The atmosphere wasn't heavy like the day I had packed my bags years ago. Susan placed a piece of fish on my plate. "Eat up, Tara. You've gotten thinner." I laughed. "Just busy." Susan. Nathan looked at me, his eyes warm. After dinner, when Leo was asleep, Nathan and I sat out on the balcony. "Tara," he called softly. "Yeah? Do you ever regret leaving my mother's house that day?" I looked out into the distance, over the Texas night sky. "If I hadn't left, do you think you would have ever changed?" He was silent. "I don't know. I don't know either," I said. "But I do know that if I had stayed and remained silent, I would have lost myself entirely." He squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not choosing silence." I turned to him. "Thank you for not letting me walk away forever." We no longer brought up the hurtful words from our past, not because we had forgotten them, but because we had learned how to look back without resentment. The day we dropped Susan off at Austin Bergstrom Airport, Leo clung to her, refusing to let go. "Grandma, don't leave." She stroked his hair. "Grandma is going home. You come visit me in Chicago soon, okay?" I stood nearby, a lump in my throat. This image was entirely different from the day I dragged my suitcase back to my parents' house, eyes full of tears and a heart full of bitterness. As her plane took off, I turned to Nathan. "We've come a really long way." He nodded. Of course, life after that wasn't perfectly smooth. Nathan's business had its ups and downs. I had design projects that fell through. Leo grew older, bringing entirely new parenting challenges. But whenever a storm hit, I no longer thought about running away or enduring it alone. I had learned that a family isn't a place where you have to suppress yourself to survive. It's a place where you can speak your truth and be heard. One evening near the end of the year, as we sat around our small dinner table, Leo suddenly asked, "Mommy, did you and Grandma used to fight a lot?" Nathan and I exchanged a look. "Yes, we did," I answered. "Why?" "Because Mommy hadn't learned how to speak up. and Grandma hadn't learned how to listen. He tilted his head. And now? Now, we're both learning. Leo smiled and went back to his food. I looked at my son's face, thinking about the years that had passed. If I hadn't dared to step out of my comfort zone that day, I would probably still be living with the feeling of being chronically undervalued. If Nathan hadn't dared to face his own shortcomings, we would have likely gone our separate ways. I used to think marriage was about enduring for the sake of the kids. Now I understand. Marriage is about growing up for the sake of each other. Right before she left for Chicago, my mother-in-law had told me, "Tara, you are stronger than I thought." I didn't reply at the time, but in my heart, I knew. I was strong not because I was excellent at enduring pain, but because I had the courage to change. And changing wasn't about defeating anyone else. It was about not losing myself. Some nights, I sit alone on the balcony, watching the city lights reflect off the Colorado River. I think back to the girl who dragged her suitcase out of her in-laws' house, her heart full of wounds, but who kept walking anyway. If I could meet that girl again, I would tell her, "Thank you for not staying in silence. Because of you, I can stand here today, peaceful and fulfilled." My family isn't perfect. My mother-in-law still worries too much sometimes, Nathan still has moments of stubbornness, and I still have exhausting days. But we have learned how to have a dialogue instead of backing each other into corners. And that is the most precious thing of all. My story isn't a fairy tale. It is the journey of a woman who dared to leave to find herself, and then dared to return to rebuild her life with mutual respect. I am no longer afraid of losing, because I know, no matter where I am, I can stand on my own 2 feet. And only when 2 people can stand firmly on their own can they truly hold hands and go the distance. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just journeyed through a long story. A story with no clear winners or losers, no sensational dramatic climaxes, but filled with the quiet turning points that alter the destiny of a family. Tara was once a daughter-in-law who chose silence to keep the peace. She thought that swallowing her pride would make her home harmonious, but the more she endured, the more she lost her own voice. Until the day she was told to go back to her parents' house to calm down. She didn't just return to calm down. She returned to wake up. What is remarkable here isn't the fact that she left. What's remarkable is what she did after she left. She didn't drown in resentment. She didn't use her trauma to feed a grudge. She relearned, stood up, and rebuilt her own value. When a woman can stand on her own 2 feet, she is no longer afraid of being marginalized. And because of that, the man in that marriage, Nathan, was forced to change. Not because he was coerced, but because he realized that if he didn't grow up, he would lose the most important thing in his life. There is a very deep philosophy here. In marriage, true change doesn't come from arguing. It comes from setting boundaries. When Tara established her boundaries, refusing to endure unconditionally, refusing to be pushed aside, she didn't destroy her family. She saved it from rotting away in silence. As for the mother-in-law, Susan, a woman raised in an era where being a daughter-in-law was synonymous with endurance, she wasn't evil. She was simply carrying outdated beliefs. Only when her health failed did she realize that authority is not what keeps a son by your side. Only respect can do that. Can we blame her? Perhaps not entirely, for every generation carries the scars of its time. What is truly valuable is that, in the end, all 3 of them learned to take a step back at the right time. Ladies and gentlemen, this story does not teach us whether we must leave or whether we must stay. It teaches us something simpler. Do not stay in silence if that silence is eroding your soul, and do not leave in hatred if you still want to build. A family is not a place for someone to prove they are right. A family is a place where everyone is allowed to speak their truth without fear of being diminished. There are so many women out there in the exact same position Tara was in years ago. They think they are weak because they aren't the primary breadwinners. They think they have to endure to save face for their husbands. But true dignity cannot be built on the suffering of another person. There are also many men like Nathan, stuck between their mothers and their wives, afraid of alienating one and accidentally abandoning the other. But being a husband isn't about standing in the middle and staying silent. Being a husband means knowing when to stand beside your wife to protect the home you built together. And there are mothers-in-law who carry the fear of losing their sons, and in doing so, unintentionally push their daughters-in-law away. Love, if not placed correctly, simply becomes immense pressure. Tara was not perfect. She was once overly rigid. Nathan was not perfect. He lacked a spine. The mother-in-law was not perfect. She was overly controlling. But they all learned to change. And that is what truly matters. Dear listeners, life is never devoid of in-law conflicts. But a conflict is not a dead end. What determines the outcome is the attitude of each individual involved. If you are listening to this story and see a reflection of yourself in it, please remember, your value is not defined by anyone else. Respect is not something you beg for. It is something built through clear boundaries and a calm demeanor. We hope that after every story, you don't just listen for entertainment, but use it as a mirror to reflect upon your own life. Maybe you are Tara. Maybe you are Nathan. Maybe you are the mother-in-law. Please leave your thoughts in the comments section. If you were Tara, would you have left? If you were Nathan, would you choose your mother or your wife? If you were the mother-in-law, would you have the courage to relinquish control to keep your son close? We look forward to reading your sincere insights. Every perspective is a lesson, and if you have an untold story in your heart, a burden you haven't spoken of, please don't keep it to yourself. Send us your letters. Who knows? Your story might be exactly what someone out there needs to find their own way out. We are here to listen. If you find value in stories like this, please subscribe to our channel, share it with your loved ones, and help us spread these lessons about family, forgiveness, and personal growth. Because ultimately, what holds a home together isn't about who defeats whom. It's about knowing that, after everything, there is still someone willing to return to the dinner table and say, "Let's fix this together." Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.